Okay, so this past Sunday at A Place to Talk, we talked about when Jesus was left. So Jesus's parents have been to Passover and they leave Passover, and we just kind of talked about that conversation. Jesus said, "Didn't you know I must be about my father's business, or about my father's, or in my father's house?" We talked about the debate about whether or not it was about place, like location, or about action. And I think the key is that this was all about action. It had nothing to do with being in the Father's house. It wasn't about the place. It was about the action. Mark kind of got us to talking about thin places. And the idea of a thin place is a place where you more readily hear from God, or you more um, you kind of, sometimes you walk into a place and you just feel like the presence of God is there, the Spirit of God is heavier there, or stronger, or maybe you're closer to God in that kind of place. Well, I don't think it's a place at all, and I think that's Mark's point too. It's not a place where the Spirit of God is heavier or the Spirit of God is more real. Rather, it is the kind of it's the feeling. It's your psychology. You are in a place where you're open to hearing from God, and that openness is what makes it a thin place. The thin places are where you're willing to hear from God. Um, Connie mentioned how Jesus being obedient, being an obedient child, but we kind of got to talking about maybe his mom and dad didn't feel like he was obedient. If you get 2 days away and he's not staying with you like he should, that might not feel like obedience to some people. And you say, well, Josh, there's no way that Jesus could have been disobedient. Well, I don't know. Maybe there's a time when being disobedient, or not being quite as aggressively obedient, maybe, to parents is the right thing. When a child is seeking and searching, and that seeking and searching kind of got us to talking about. Art asked, "Do you think?" Or Arthur asked, "Do you think if do you think Jesus was a savant?" And that kind of led to Shantae saying, "I wonder if Jesus might have been considered autistic if he was alive today. If he was a 12-year-old or a child today, would people have wondered if he was autistic, because he had that hyper focus ability, and he kind of got in there with the the priest, and he was questioning and asking questions, and that took us down a fun conversation. Mark talked about being a prison chaplain, and at some point telling this guy who was seeking God to just go and seek and read anything you wanted to, and study all the religions, and just look for God wherever he is. And Mark kind of wondered if that was a mistake. He said, what a dumb thing to say. Or was that brilliant? And I think the answer is, I think that's right. I think it's a smart thing to do. The idea that, well, let me say this: truth isn't afraid. Truth has no fear. So if you are in a group, a religious group, and they're trying to cut you off from books and telling you not to read this and not to think about that, it might be that they're afraid of you discovering something that maybe doesn't align with what they're teaching. But truth is never afraid. What I mean by that is, when Mark said to that inmate, just seek God anywhere and everywhere, truth isn't afraid. We don't have, there's no reason to fear that you might wander down a path that's wrong. Truth will, if you're really seeking truth, you'll find it. And I think there's somebody mentioned a passage in the shack where Papa says, no, 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 I'm not saying that all roads really lead to God, but I'm saying that God will chase you down any road or meet you at the end of any road. And I think that's a very healthy way to look at it. So, um, we kind of took a sidetrack, but we worked through the questions and we talked about what Jesus was doing there in the temple when his parents had kind of left him for a few days, and we had a fun conversation, and we ended up thinking about maybe intentionally setting up thin places in our life, places where we could be intentionally listening and intentionally open to the Spirit of God. And maybe even setting up thin times in our lives. In other words, setting up times where we wanted to intentionally be open to the Spirit of God and listening for the Spirit of God. So those would be both thin times and thin places. And those might, if we intentionally put those in our life, maybe those will give us, I don't know, give us more opportunities to hear from, listen to, and learn from the Spirit of God. And hopefully, the goal is that we will love like Jesus. In my world, we've been seeing people write LLB, love like Bria, and and uh, and I think that anytime we can love like somebody who loved well, I think that's a Christ-like action. Love like Bria, love like Jesus. Um, that's my encouragement for you today. Set up some thin times and thin spaces in your life so you can listen to the Spirit of God so that you can get better and better at loving like Jesus.